Hey, well, good afternoon, good morning, all. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. I'm Doug Pagitt, talking with Tamice Spencer-Helms, who has just written a great book. And Tamice, couldn't be more excited for you to be here. Thanks for being on the Common Good Podcast today. Big fan of your book, a big fan of your work, actually, Faith Unleavened. It's a beautiful metaphor, and so glad to have you. So thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
Hey, tell us where you're sitting right now. Where are we chatting from? I'm in Minneapolis. I'll let you know that, in my little basement studio. Where are you coming from?
Oh, I'm coming to you from the lands of the Mattaponi and Sinnecomica and Powhatan land, otherwise known as Richmond, Virginia.
That's great. So you're naming the indigenous space, indigenous name in the land that was taken. That's so helpful, so important. Is that something you've known about for a long time, or how has that gone for you, learning and understanding the history of the place where you're living?
Yeah, I would say that it's really been kind of a process of learning. One of my really dear friends, Sarah Quint, has been teaching me a lot about acknowledging land and
Hmm.
understanding that we're on stolen land. I started learning that with Randy Woodley and folks like that, but recently, kind of learning about the importance of indigenous land as it relates to my blackness. I've been learning that from
Mm.
my friend Sarah Quint, and actually I'm living on her land, and so this is the land of her peoples, and so I kind of take that really seriously, and we teach our daughter to kind of steward the land as though we're taking care of it for Auntie Sarah and stuff like that. So that's where we are with that.
Wow, that's
So still
beautiful.
learning, never arrived.
Where did you grow up? Where was home?
So I grew up about 2 hours from here in Chesapeake, Virginia. It was right like about 15, 20 minutes from the beach. And I lived there until I went to college here in Richmond. Then I moved to the Midwest. I moved down south and I moved back to Virginia.
Okay,
And
and
I've got a
and
dog here that is barking and some folks moving around the house, just so you know.
you know what? Around here on the Common Good Podcast and live stream, we love that kind of stuff,
Okay,
right?
perfect.
People live real lives, right? And people are
It's true.
doing and saying and all the things that they're doing from
Yeah,
real places and in real spaces, and not a
yeah,
problem. Not a
yeah,
problem around here at all.
yeah.
All
Awesome.
right, so we're going to talk about your book here in a bit and about the content of it, but that's not all you do. You're not just an author; you're an activist and you're a spokesperson. You have these beautiful rambles
Yes,
on social media, by the way, that you call them.
I love
Really
good.
great. It's a great notion. When I heard one of
Yeah.
your videos where you said that, someone had said, "Hey, Tamice, I think you should do one of your rambles on this." I thought that is a you nailed that. It's a great frame.
Thank you.
But you also help students find their way into and be successful in higher education.
I do. Yeah, that's my goal. So in 2018, I started a nonprofit called Subculture Incorporated. And Subculture really exists to remove the barriers that Black college students face to graduation, to academic success, holistic well being, social flourishing, mental health. We want to get in there and provide the resources and even the crisis relief in a financial way
Mm.
that would remove any kind of barrier so that if they face a roadblock, that roadblock doesn't become a dead end for them, because we know that unfortunately for people of color, school is a major pathway to kind of closing wealth gap and developing generational wealth. And so the way that we work our advocacy out is by educating folks on the disparities, but then also providing real-time help for Black college students who are in crisis.
Such a great idea. What led you to that? Was that your own experience in college that it was difficult, or you saw it in other
Well,
people's experiences?
not so much my experience. I was fortunate. My parents went to Hampton University, which was an HBCU,
Hmm.
and my father saved up for me to go to college in state, um, and so that's what I did. But really, it was my work with Black college students as a minister, as a campus minister,
Interesting.
and watching my students face crises and things that I would watch my white students face, and grandma would come through, or somebody, they had a web of support around them
Mm.
that a lot of my Black students just didn't have, and I'm
Right.
a broke campus minister that can only do so much. And so it was really it was weighing on me. And then I read this quote by Desmond Tutu that really kind of changed my thinking about everything. And so I just started Subculture to address, not to necessarily reinvent the wheel, but to
Hmm.
reinforce it by providing for students what I couldn't provide for them when I was in campus ministry.
Yeah, That's great. Well, it's a beautiful idea. So glad you're doing it, and you've launched into being an author. You have this book coming out. I think here
Yeah.
just in a week or so. Is that right? Is release date like
Tuesday.
next Tuesday? We
Yeah.
like to we like to remind people in our chats here that books come out on Tuesday. A lot of people don't know that.
That's true.
Movies release on Fridays, and
Yeah.
podcasts do whatever day you want to do them. But
Yeah.
books come out on Tuesday. So
Yeah.
this Tuesday, people can pre-order Faith Unleavened: The Wilderness Between Trayvon Martin and George Floyd. Um,
Yeah.
all right, so this book has this wonderful metaphor in the title,
Yes.
Faith Unleavened. The idea that there of leaven, which is a thing that was true in first century Jewish culture and
Mhm.
still important to people today. But the idea that a little bit of something starts to sort of impact and grow the
Right.
way that leaven experiences in making of bread. And
Mhm.
you suggest that there was a whiteness, a leaven of whiteness in the Christianity that you experienced.
Yes.
And that's a really powerful metaphor. And then there's another metaphor in the subtitle, which is the wilderness between Trayvon Martin and
Sure.
George Floyd. And both
Mhm.
of these are powerful things, right? How do you live in the wilderness,
Mhm.
and how do you travel without the leaven? These are
Mhm.
like ancient human storylines that you're getting into. So that's what the book is about. For those who haven't had a chance to see it yet, is you're trying to navigate these questions of
Mhm.
what does it mean to have a Christianity that's not so impacted by a particular cultural form that it makes it
Right.
difficult. And it comes with such pain and such violence in its history that
Sure.
it's just really just rather not only unappealing to people, it's quite dangerous to people. So,
It's true. It's
so
very true. Thank you
all
for
right.
saying.
So these are the things we're going to talk about. What got you into this particular form? Like, you want to write this in a book, and you want to use these driving metaphors of the Trayvon Martin to George Floyd narrative, which is
Mhm.
both experience and incident, but also is a calendar, right? It's a
Mhm.
time. It tells us there's a period of time. Is that how you were thinking about that
Absolutely.
wilderness in those spaces?
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. So, in terms of thinking about the wilderness piece, I think when you think about wilderness in terms of using the biblical motif of wilderness, usually people are drawn to the wilderness to connect with God, to
Mm,
learn about themselves, to confront the dangers around them, right?
yeah.
And they end up emerging from this sort of desolate place with a new amount of freedom, but also a revolutionized view of God.
Hmm.
And for me, my wilderness journey really started when Trayvon was killed,
Hmm.
because it revealed to me that there was something that was not right about loving and knowing a Jesus who didn't really know me and know why I would be in pain over something like that. And of course, I was experiencing God in that place, and in the pain of that place. But the responses of peers, and even some of the rhetoric from pulpits, was very confusing for me at that time and showed me that there's no way for me to persist in this.
Hmm.
And so I was bound to it. I loved Jesus. I was a very faithful disciple. I think I'm still a very faithful disciple. But I remember having to go through this process of like kind of figuring out what happened here. And I hit this place. The book starts in 2015, where I hit this place after just this real despair and depression, and realized that something had been added to the Christianity that I inherited from the white evangelical spaces I grew up in. And so that was where kind of the journey started. And the journey started with this idea of the unleavened bread of the wilderness, which kind of precipitates that journey, and realizing that Jesus is bread,
Hmm.
bread of life, and that too much leaven is toxic for the bread
Nice.
itself,
Hmm.
and it will make you sick. It will kill you, and that's really why Jesus was doing. Why Jesus was killing me, very slowly, and so it really did take that. That devastation of Trayvon to really wake me up to begin to sort of see that stuff and begin to extract it. And that's the kind of the story I tell. And then when George Floyd happened, um, I experienced the murder of George Floyd very differently than I did
Wow.
Trayvon. And that was actually what tipped me off to, wow, there's been a work that's been happening here. And that's why I started to write the stuff down and kind of tell that story. It was in hindsight, looking back and seeing, oh, okay, this is what's happened. I'm unleavened, and I was in a wilderness and I've emerged with this new understanding of God, and this new amount
Mm.
of freedom that I'm taking with me, right? And so that's kind of where the book is centered around, and it just beautifully lined up, um, but it wasn't planned. So that's where we are.
Yeah, well, it's a powerful working narrative, and the way you tell it here is captivating as well. I can imagine that as you're beginning to recognize the things from 2015 moving forward, you're embedded in your faith. It's your job, like
Hmm.
your employment's tied into it. You
Yeah.
your family is from a tradition of this. As
Hmm.
you start to notice these shifts in
Yeah.
you, and you start to see things about the faith that you have been living in and that you inherited, and
Yes.
you're like, this isn't what I want it to be now, and I didn't have any control over it then,
Hmm.
but I have some control over how I'm going to move forward now.
Hmm.
How did that land on the people in your life? How did it land on your parents when you start saying, look, I was introduced to an evangelical form of Christianity that gave me a white Jesus that I'm not all that interested in?
Yes.
That can
Yeah.
start to feel, that can land close, or you say that to people in your work environment. How did that go as you started to unleaven
Yes. So
yourself?
it's interesting because I think there were, I talk a lot about, hold on, Doug, someone is knocking on my
Oh, I
door.
love it. Someone's knocking at your door. Someone's
One
ringing your
second.
bell. You just go ahead.
Give me
I'll
one
talk a bit
sec.
about your book. You go
So,
ahead. You go ahead and do that. That's why
one moment.
do you want to go get the door? Make sure
Yeah,
they're
I'll get the
taken care of.
door.
You go
You
do
might
that.
wanna
That's all right. That's all right.
show the
Yeah.
book. Show the book because I'm wearing
Look,
pajama
yeah,
shorts.
yeah. Okay. You go. I'm going to talk for a minute. All right. So, we are listening. Yeah. Now I've got a countdown running because I got the wrong clock up there. We're listening, we're talking with Tamice Spencer-Helms about her book. The book comes out, this week. You have a chance to connect with it. I'll just say to those of you as the watchers and listeners of this, what the reason I wanted to talk with Tamice particularly is because I think she represents a vantage point that can be really helpful to a lot of us. One, she's of a generation where the experiences of Trayvon Martin and George Floyd are really powerful and are shaping her. And she's awakening to the realities of her world there, and doing it from the perspective of someone who experiences Christianity in the United States and all the issues of race as a black person and as a black woman and as a young black woman. And all of those social locations are really powerful. And Tamice is particularly generous with being willing to share those stories. So glad you're back. I
I'm
was
back.
just giving
I'm so sorry.
a little update on the book. Look, we do these as live experiences on purpose.
Cool.
We could just be recording this, and I'll say I'll cut that out later.
Yeah.
But then, Alex and Yvonne and Mike, who are watching right now,
Hey,
uh,
guys.
they're glad to experience this with you. No one's so important that we can't wait a minute, right? Just
Right.
give people a minute to figure out to figure out their lives. All right. So I was
Yes.
asking you what the experience was as you
Yeah,
started to
my family.
awaken to these issues, and then you start talking out loud and saying these things, and
Yes.
I don't know, maybe posting them on Facebook and not bringing them up at home first, or however it goes.
That went well.
How did that land on the world that you were in?
It landed on my family, beautifully, and it's interesting the level of, scrutiny I had towards folks who weren't in that white evangelical space, because what was interesting was the very people that I had been sort of, I don't know, over time had just become
Hmm.
dismissive towards, were still there and still faithful and not struggling in their faith at all. And here I was, this person who had told them how far away from Jesus they were and how, they didn't have as much depth in God. And I'm struggling and spinning out. But my family was extremely gracious. They talked to me about the experience. They never judged me. And I know that there's a section in the book where you get to hear from my father in the book, a letter that he wrote me. And it was interesting there to feel like my family's been here this whole time. It added to the grief and the regret.
Mm.
In the other spaces, um, it really was an awakening. And I know that woke has this connotation now, but it was an awakening for me. And in 2012, 2013, woke was a appropriate way to describe what was happening for people, because they just didn't realize that this is the way the world was for a lot of them that were in these sort of white evangelical spaces.
Yeah.
And so I got a lot of texts, a lot of "Hey sisters," "Hey, you've been on my mind," "Hey, I had a dream about you," those types
Hmm.
of "God put you on my heart" type of things. And I just could not figure out why me loving being black, and hating the pillaging and violence being done to black bodies, why that would cause any concern for my white brothers and sisters. It just didn't make sense to me. And you hang with it for a while, and then 2016 happens. And that was kind of like, wait a minute. Wait a minute, like one of these things is not like the other, because I'm calling to mind the comments and the things everyone was worried about in 2008. And I'm going, 8 years later, none of that matters. And so there was
Hmm.
something else at work here. And so when I began to be vocal about that, I pretty much lost lost everybody. I got about one or two left, but for the most part, they kind of, exited.
You mean
Uh,
people from your work world or your sort of faith support system when
yeah, my
you started talking
friends.
about politics and culture and all of these
Yes.
things, like everything was under the scrutiny?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, it
Mhm.
was friends and people I considered to be family at the time.
Yeah.
It was really hard to feel like, and I was having these conversations with folks over the phone even, and saying, "Hey, this is what you don't understand. This is what you," because I went on my journey and I'm learning about all these things. And I'm like, "Here's what you probably don't know," and it would always be, "Yeah, yeah, but abortion," or "Yeah, yeah, but the gays," or "Yeah, yeah, but." And it's like, "Hey, I'm asking you to love me, and you're saying, 'Yeah, yeah, but.' I'm telling you I'm in
Mhm.
pain and my soul is being crushed and I'm being traumatized right now by the state of things, and you're saying, 'Yeah, yeah, but.'" And for a person that had no the idea that that would be the person that they would say the "yeah, yeah, but" about,
Yeah.
it showed me how much, I was valued in those relationships. And I think that's not, I don't necessarily blame them. I think whiteness makes, especially, yeah, whiteness and white Jesus, things are very transactional. And
Mhm.
so, as you unleaven, you'll start to experience how transactional even your relationships were. And so it was a bittersweet process.
And I would imagine, I don't want to put words in your mouth on this, but I want to ask you if this was true because I've experienced this and seen it in so many other situations as well.
Yeah.
That as you start to say, look, I think there was something added to the spirituality that I was given,
Mhm.
and I want to move forward without that, and I want to name it, and I want to be attentive to it.
Mhm.
When other people don't see those things, they
Yes.
think you're adding something. They
Exactly.
think you're now saying you're giving up the gospel or the Jesus narrative or something, and you've moved into this other area.
Yes.
So they
Exactly.
become the hero protecting the true thing.
Mhm.
And you're thinking, no, I'm trying to show you. And this thing that happens where the inability to see the other thing and to sort of consider that the other person is doing the thing that you're trying to protect.
Yes.
What you're nodding about? What was that? Was that your experience?
Yes, it was. I mean, I talk about that in the chapter Sidewalks, right? It's this idea of gatekeeping. And it's so interesting how these things, and I do, I'm still a person of faith, and so I see these threads and I'm grateful for them, because even thinking about gatekeeping and thinking about George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, right? A self-appointed gatekeeper, a self-appointed neighborhood watch person
Great.
confronts this boy in his own neighborhood who is unarmed. He has nothing but candy and an iced tea, right? And somehow he's the threat. And somehow he's the
Wow.
intruder, right? And in the same way, these people are saying, there are some things that are not jiving with my faith and what I'm seeing about Jesus and what was compelling to me about Jesus and the way that it's playing out in society, right? And in my mental health, and you're the one adding. And it's like,
Mhm.
I'm not bothering anyone. I mean, I'm not out here asking you to take up my stance or anything. I'm just saying I'm human. I have dignity. God loves me like I am. And you're telling me that's addition, but that's because of the leaven, right? Like in the same way that an unarmed boy with a hoodie could be dangerous in his own neighborhood. That's the same leaven that makes a person who is getting free a threat to Christianity.
Wow.
It's the same leaven. It's whiteness, right? Because whiteness is about ownership and transaction and binary and categorization. And you can't do those things. You can only do those things in whiteness. Like that's what it's
Mhm.
set up to do. And so when that infiltrates our vision of Jesus or God, well, you see what that looks like in
Mm.
society right now, right? Even with these like he gets us campaigns, the question is, well, he gets who,
Mhm.
right? There's no qualifiers, and so then I, of course, me, still being the precocious kid that I am, I went to the website and I'm looking at who's putting the ads out, like where are these coming from, where do the links click, and what do those people believe are the us, right? Who is the us to those people? Because he gets us is great, but it matters who the us is, and it matters what that means for the us. Because I think it's amazing on the one hand that they're really kind of putting Jesus out here, and on the other hand it's kind of like $1 billion going towards an ad campaign could put a lot of people in homes. Right, like and so he
Totally.
gets
Yeah.
us could show up like, hey, I'm gonna help you with your rent, or I'm gonna like he can get us that way too, right?
Yeah.
And so
Uh,
those are the types of questions I think unleavening has started to cause me to ask.
right. It starts this like spiritual chemical process that doesn't end, right? Like it
Right.
has an initial start and then just keeps on rolling. Uh, I hear you saying that whiteness is something more than just cultural, social, race narrative. It's a category of
Yes.
approach that
Mhm.
is often embedded inside of a white culture, but it's more than that. And some
Mhm.
people, if that's what you mean, I think some people have a hard time getting that because
Sure.
people will share examples and they'll say something like, "Well, Zimmerman wasn't a white guy; he was a
Right.
person of color."
Mhm.
Like it turns into, "Are you a white person or not?" I think you mean whiteness in a more um,
Ideological.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about how you use it and
Yes.
why
So
that's helpful for people?
thanks for asking that. That's good because it's important. And I think whiteness is not an ethnicity. I think whiteness is a myth, but it is a myth that is really powerful. It has very powerful implications. It's a normalization of white supremacy, and so if you think of it like a like degrees of whiteness, right? All of the goodies in America, if you're not a white person, like if you're not of European descent, but you kind of live into some of these ideals of whiteness, right? Then you can touch the American dream, right? Like you can experience America in a certain type of way. And I think that that's what it means to me is that whiteness is America's like birth defect. It's not a person. It's embedded in the systems of a country that was built by people who believed in their own superiority, right? And their own supremacy. And so if all of your legal systems, your institutions are built by people who believe that myth, well then whiteness is everywhere. It is the air we breathe,
Mhm, mhm.
right? And so it affects everyone, and I try to really kind of lean into that in the book, because it's something that affects everyone. And you really
Mhm.
can only it's like we pay attention to the air, like with COVID, right? Like we
Mm.
start wearing masks because now there's poison in the air, and I think, and that's a vacuum. Sorry.
It's all right.
um, but yeah, I mean, we wear these masks because now we know that there's something poisonous in the air. We cannot see it, but we know it is there. It is
Mm.
making people sick, and it is making them die, and it's disproportionately making people of color die. Right?
Yeah.
Like we have a very interesting metaphor here. And so even in that, like people denying that it's real, right? I think there are so
Yeah.
many levels of this thing. There are so many object lessons that it's time for us to really think about this thing and go, okay, we were wrong about that. And that's all you
Mhm.
have to say is like, we were wrong about that. Now, how do we repent of that in our systems and institutions,
Mm.
right? And I think, especially as Christians, for us to not be having those conversations, it's can be really off-putting for people. So then again, I ask, like, he gets who?
Hmm.
um,
Sure. Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah. We need to do something about that, right? Those of
right.
us that are out in this business. And that's why your book is so helpful and so important. I'm interested in your thoughts on this as I've heard people describe whiteness, and some of the
Hmm.
words click with me really well. I get it. Like, I understand white supremacy. For some people, they're like, I don't even understand that word supremacy.
Yes.
I like to suggest, I heard someone do a training on diversity, and the
Yeah.
trainer said, how many of you believe in diversity? Raise your hand. And of course, everybody there does. They're at a training center, training offering on diversity. And
Yeah.
then the trainer said, and when you say diverse, you mean diverse from what? And he said,
uh,
if you mean diverse from white, that's where we're going to start. So it's, what is the default? What is the norm? When people see that a white person, a white male, is successful in America, nobody goes, well, look, there's a white male who made it work. But if you're a black female who makes it work, people start naming them, right? They're like athletes and Oprah. They're like, no, see, it is possible. And that
Mm-hmm.
shows that one is the default. That's not a surprise. One
Mm-hmm.
is the exception to the rule. So it starts to just sort of show you. And so when people say supremacy, they mean it's the first, or it's the norm, or it's the one that's better than the others. And so the system is designed to work
Mm-hmm.
for them. Is that how you think about it that way? But
Absolutely.
does that connect with what you think?
Absolutely. And I love that you, a white men, are explaining whiteness in such a beautiful way, because it's like, I've waited a long time to hear that articulated by someone who wasn't a person of color, right?
Yeah.
Because it gets tiring and it gets exhausting to tell everyone there's poison in the air. Look at all the people dying. Like,
Right.
it gets exhausting. And so I think, I'm just grateful for people like you and for voices like yours that are saying, this is what it is. Now that we know, what are we going to do? Right. We're not,
Hmm.
I personally am not after anyone sitting in shame. I've done that myself. Right. Like, it's no
Yeah.
fun for anybody. But we do need to kind of acknowledge, and now what are we going to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And
Like,
replace that with beauty from
yeah,
ashes, as the biblical word.
absolutely.
A couple of years ago, I was part of a group that got arrested at the United States Supreme Court, calling for the end of executions. And there
Hmm.
were 17 of us who were arrested. And I think 11 of us were white people and were white males. And so we were all in jail overnight at the Cook County, or not the Cook County, at the Washington, D.C. County
Hmm.
Jail overnight. When the
Hmm.
guard came in, the person who was, in charge of all that and was moving us from one area to the other, there were 47 people in the holding cell we were in. 11 of us were white,
Wow.
just our group. There were no other white people that had been arrested that night, which is a
Wow.
little surprising, right? And the marshal comes in, a black man, and he looks at his cohorts working with him, and he hits one of them on the arm and says, "What are all these white guys doing in here? We don't get this very often. It must be one of those social protests, huh?" He's
Wow.
calling out and making fun of the fact that every day they have a holding cell full of people. There's not white people in that thing. That's
Wow.
the other side to sort of the default about who goes well, is who does the system tend to arrest and hold down
Mhm,
and convict?
mhm, mhm,
And that's the other side of all of this. So when
mhm,
people think, oh, you're just not what people are claiming, and like you are in the need for us to unleaven, you're not
sure.
just saying, well, not everyone gets the best. You're also saying poison's in the system, and it's causing some rooms to be full of not white people. And 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 that just goes on and on and on. So I
Mhm,
want to ask you this, right? Like, if I'm sitting around with a group of people that uh, come from white spaces, and
mhm,
they say, well, it was in 2015 where I started to kind of wake up to this.
sure.
There's a whole lot of people who say,
Mhm.
little late for that. It took you 20, and they start naming, as they should. They go
Yes.
back through history, right? And they're like, what took you so long? You made it all the way through high school. You made it all the way through college, right? There's this it's an important narrative, right? Where we should say, like, I should have been here sooner. I wish I'd been here sooner. Maybe I could, whatever your phrase is. How do you think about that as someone who sort of had your own awakening in
Yeah.
this, in this recent period? And some of
Mhm.
that's just age, right? Like these are not issues that happen once. These are issues that are perennial in the
Yeah.
United States. How do you think about that?
Mhm.
Your own coming to age, and what do you say to other people who, maybe are older than you or younger, but also are having awakenings,
Yeah.
I don't know, 8 years ago or now,
Are you
are
talking
still
about people of color or white folks?
both. I mean, I know
Oh,
people, I have friends who are people
yeah.
of color that have also said like they experience a lot of self regret about
Mhm.
not being in on these issues earlier.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't hear that as much in real time as I do from, people that confide, and a lot of the work we do, we end up talking to people about this stuff.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I think for those it's not too late. So I think for me, there would be a different approach or something different I would say to each of the groups. I think if you're a white person, that a lot of white folks, even around 2020, started to be like, oh, okay.
mhm.
um, and so yeah, I think during that time it was very much like I'm thinking this parable is popping in my head, so I'm just gonna go with it, see where it goes.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
this idea of the 11th hour and that everyone gets the same reward. But I guarantee you that the folks who started like kind of working, or like dealing with all of this in 2012 are probably going to be a little bit more exhausted and not able to teach or be as patient, or have the strength or the energy to kind of show you what to do at the 11th hour. And so
Nice.
um, you're going to probably need to look somewhere else than to the people who started back then. But we all get the same reward, right? And the reward is that we get free, and we get to live into, I think, even what America was supposed to be. For Black and people of color, for BIPOC folks, I would say if you're just waking up, so sorry. And I'm with you. I think there is a lot of mourning and grief that goes with that, a lot of regret. It's a very painful process because you just kind of find out who really loves you. And
Mhm.
uh, that's hard. And so I just want to say, like, it's worth it, but it is very difficult. But there are so many of us who have done this work, this deep work, and there are plenty of resources. Naya Abernathy would be one of Earth and Stars, and The Dignity Effect, Cole Arthur Riley, and Black Liturgies. I mean, there are a number of folks. Robert Monson wrote a book called Subversive Stillness. And so there are ways that we can kind of sort of reclaim ourselves, and heal. But I
Mhm.
think my recommendation would be only do what you feel in your body you have capacity to do,
Mm.
and really take the process slow, because it's a hard process. It's really hard.
I want to tag onto into one phrase you just used there, because I know my wife will listen to this. And when you say that phrase, only do what you know in your body you can do. She's big into this. The body keeps the score, and trauma informed work and
Yeah.
trauma informed yoga. She does. So
Yeah.
I can already hear her uh, giving an amen to that. Can
Hey,
you
hey.
say a few more things about why the body, and why you included that, and why you not only included here in this conversation, but overall in the work you do?
Yeah. I think that was so really I owe it to the therapist I was seeing, because she said to me, when everything was kind of falling apart, she said to me, "Hey, um, have you ever thought that maybe when you can't really trust what's going on in your mind and how you used to hear God and how you used to conceptualize and all those
Mhm.
things, is it possible that maybe God could be speaking to you in your body? Um, your body is a part of you." And literally, it was like, wait, what? My body's a part of me. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
What witchcraft is this? But it was that was the first time I ever thought about bringing my body into my walk with God. And I know that sounds so silly, but it was true. And it was helpful to me because I started to feel, I had already started to feel things in certain spaces or at certain events, and it would be, it was
Mhm.
really bizarre, like panic attacks and hives and itching and sweating. It was really, hearing certain phrases, hearing certain songs. It was just really a hard time. And I thought something was wrong. And she just said, I think what you're having is a visceral reaction, and your body's protecting you. And that was the first time
Um,
I thought about that, and that God can speak to us through our bodies. And it made me really lament some of the messages I heard about my body, right? With purity culture, and then total depravity, that will mess you up in
right.
terms of involving your body in anything. So I think, like, there's a real turning on self that takes place,
Mhm.
that it takes some time to recover, which is why I really would encourage people to listen to the body. Like, where are you
Yeah.
feeling anxiety? When you hear this message, what is the feeling? What does your body feel?
Mhm.
Now sit in that feeling and ride that out. Now journal, do some art. Like, I've started to incorporate those things. I married a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so that's part of it. We do art
Good.
therapy
Yeah.
all the live long day over here. But I think, like, that's something that has been added to my spirituality, and it's been beautiful, and it's really been
Mm.
grounding for me, because I won't betray myself
Right.
in the name of God anymore,
Mm.
and I'm okay with saying that. So
Yeah. And the divine would never call you to do so. So it's
absolutely not.
such a great thing. Well, Denise, I was proud to write an endorsement for the book, and I said that we
Thank
all
you.
need guides on this sojourn that we're on, and you gave a long list of people that have helped you, and I know that you will be one of those people that is helping
Hope so.
others. And Faith Unleavened is one of those. If you're going to read books on these things, this is one you should include. And Tamice is someone you should follow and pay attention to. And if they want to, they can find you at all the places by
All
obviously
places.
looking at your name and following you on social media and inviting you to share and to speak at things and to talk about books. And I'm sure if
Definitely.
you're willing to be on this podcast, you're willing to be on a lot of them. So maybe
Absolutely.
maybe other people would be glad to have you. And I hope you just all the best in all of this. And
Thank you, Doug. I
thanks for being
appreciate
a
it.
part of this today.
And thank for what you do too.
Yeah, right
Yeah,
on.
thank
You are sure welcome. Well, thanks all, and we'll be back with you again tomorrow. So thanks for being a part of the Common Good podcast.